The population that's in a skilled nursing facility, they never get attention. And I don't mean in person. I mean like the health plan even is like maybe they'll have a care coordinator, maybe, but 9 times out of 10, all the focus is just, oh, well, like they're in a facility. They're lonely. Sometimes they're forgotten. They need help. They're going through a degradation of their health. By the time that we actually get a claim from an inpatient stay, it could be 60, 90 days, right? So your speed to action or engage that member is significantly reduced. We're developing a way that we can almost like self-report that somebody's moved and almost fast track the entire thing before we even get a claim. The cool thing with I-SNP, we're actually able to treat people bedside and avoid hospitalizations that otherwise they would have. I-SNPs are a model that allow us to treat bedside to a vulnerable population that's often forgotten. And it's a good way of just treating people like people.
Everybody, welcome to the next episode. Super excited for today's conversation. We got Brad Riley with us. He is the VP of, I'm going to get this right, Brad, Analytics, MedEcon, Reporting, and the Project Management Office at Longevity Health. And so, Brad, super excited for the conversation. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your role and what you're up to these days?
Sure. No, I appreciate the opportunity just to be here. So I guess my background's a little different than most healthcare, right? So I started out in private equity, transitioned into the bigger orgs, and spent some time over at some of the larger organizations in managed care. A little bit of time up in DC, and then the most recent gig I had before this one, I was up in New York City. So I was up with one of the larger health plans up there, leading their clinical data strategy. In this current role I'm at Longevity. Longevity is a unique organization where it's a clinical services organization, but it's also a health plan, right? So we're the nation's largest and fastest growing independent I-SNP. And so we specialize in providing unique health plans to members in skilled nursing facilities only, which is really fascinating from an analytics perspective, just because you get a really high population of a really niche kind of cohort. But my role kind of evolved there. I joined just to kind of help with some of the clinical liaisoning between IT and clinical, and then ultimately grew into this role where I'm at now, where I lead our analytics, our reporting, our medical economics, and then our PMO. We call it RAMP for fun. So it's a nice little, acronym just to pull everything together. But a lot of really cool stuff going on. We got really, really fascinating. I wouldn't call it boring. It's exciting, like just general analytic kind of style stuff that's not AI. And I think that AI is getting so much attention right now. I think there's also really cool stuff happening in analytics that's not particularly AI. That's worth noting. And then also, of course, the buzzword of the decade, AI. So I think we're doing some cool stuff, and I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah. Brad, one of the things that I sometimes will hear from either existing clients or prospective clients is, I'm already serving the most complex of the most complex. What can you surface for me that really yields opportunity for improving member health or reducing avoidable or unnecessary spend? I mean, you're at the kind of the height of that dynamic, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about how you're using analytics to surface opportunities? Obviously, nothing proprietary, but how are you perceiving that dynamic, and where are you finding opportunities?
It's interesting. When I think through opportunities, there's two different scopes you could look at it through. You could look at opportunities through just like, what is it, right? Like, what are you reporting out on? Are you looking at claims data, data? Are you looking at softer data like clinical notes or extracts from an EMR, right? And I think honestly, we still have a way to go in integrating data and just taking disparate data systems and pulling them all together. I think that's something everybody experiences, right? As well as the operational side of taking operations out of spreadsheets and making sure it's more automated. But that kind of feeds into what I believe to be the more important piece is like data starts to become stagnant when time passes, right? So outside of just what we're giving people or what we're looking at, it's also about timeliness. Now, you could give everybody the best information you've got, but if you don't have it in a way that is quick, it loses its value. And so for me, I think we're working on not just making sure that we're getting data that looks at the full picture of the member experience and looks at the full picture of the member, but we're also trying to our best to do it in a strategic way that will make it quick. And when I mean that, I mean, if a member goes into a hospital, there's a lot of delay between us as a health plan. Like if you think of any general health plan, right? The amount of time it takes, member's going to go into the hospital inpatient, care coordination might find out, but by the time that we actually get a claim from an inpatient stay, it could be 60, 90 days, right? So your speed to action or engage that member is significantly reduced. The member very possibly, especially if they're extremely acute or it's just dependent upon what the situation is, they could have already had one or two other readmissions by the time you get the first claim, right? And so there's some interesting stuff we've done just to try to figure out and understand what we've called like member movement, like where a member is going. And there's other indicators outside of claims that you can use to kind of look at that. You can look at and use that kind of as a proxy. You can look at communications within skilled nursing facilities. So one really interesting initiative we have going now, it's not quite live yet, but we're looking at trying to figure out how can we utilize the communications within the facilities themselves. We have staff that we place in facilities, and nurse practitioners primarily that go into facilities, and we have member advocates that go in. So we have presence, like physical presence in the facilities. There's a lot of conversation that takes place in facilities with facility staff and other things. We're developing a way that we can like almost like self-report that somebody's moved. And so even if we don't have an auth on file from an emergent stay, or even if something hasn't triggered yet from a data lens, right? We can almost do like an internal alert system that somebody did it and almost fast track the entire thing. So we can start planning intervention before we even get a claim. And so there's ways we're trying to get creative about, you know, data is just as good as it can be, but like, what are other ways that we can kind of create the speed to market on some information and hopefully intervene that member before another, negative circumstance kind of takes place and puts them back in the hospital?
Brad, I love how you're surfacing the importance of kind of the shelf life of some of this data. I think that, when I think about what we're up to and what you guys are up to, there's all kinds of ways that analytics break down when it comes to the rubber meeting the road, so to speak. And you're surfacing the time component. What are the other things that you think about in terms of moving from pure analytics to real action? And I'm really interested in hearing your point of view because you come from both sides of the equation. You were in an operations role and now you're in an analytics role and still have some pieces of that. But your experience brings a unique perspective in turning analytics into action.
The number one thing that I did when we reorged under me is I hired a non-analytics person to join the analytics team, right? And it sounds kind of backwards, but like the biggest thing that we run into, and I've seen it, it's a cyclical problem. It's not longevity health. It's not any of the other places I've been. It is an industry problem. Is that we have analytics leaders who hire analytics people, and then those analytics people hire analytics people, and then you end up with this pillar of analytics folks who are super smart, super capable. They have no idea what's going on in terms of like the operations of the business, right? They don't know what it's like to be a boot on the ground on the team, to be a clinician in the field, or to be somebody who's focusing on growth or somebody who's focusing on provider network management, right? And so I brought on a new role and there wasn't a job description, so I got to write it from scratch, which was a blast. It's called like the clinical delivery lead, right? And the whole point is it's like, this is somebody who's good with numbers. She's incredibly intelligent, but at the same time, she was in clinical. And so I was able to take her from an ops role, bring her into the analytics role, and her only job is to help liaison between our analytics team and the clinical team and to make sure that there is no disconnect. Because we'll talk through one from a perspective of just like verbiage. We might be saying something, and for our audience, whether it's clinicians or whether it's market growth or whatever, right? They might not understand what it is that we're saying, and we might not understand what they're saying. And so the most important thing is like there has to be a conduit. There has to be a person who plays a role to translate between the two, and those are hard to find. Those are really
Yeah.
hard people to find, but I think when you find it, we just brought one on for our market growth team, and that's going well too, and I think it's people that understand what I like to say is, like, they've gotta understand how the machine works, and
Yeah.
if they understand how the machine works, Then they can translate it to the data people and help my analysts build or developers build dashboards or create, small applications that we can kind of push out. But like if if an analytics team is heads down working extremely hard and they have no checks and balances and it's just them and their end user, the likelihood of having a mistake when they come to deliver the final product and people are like, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought. Right. And then you rework and you rework and you rework. So it is absolutely worth the extra talent and the extra administrative cost to make sure you've got, just like with AI, a person in the loop, right? Like we've got to make sure there's like an operator in the loop to
Yeah.
translate between both teams.
Yeah, I love that. And not only did I mean, back when I was running the plan, I experienced exactly that, where I had a very competent medical economics team, but they didn't speak clin ops. And so what I would often hear from my med econ team is, no, we're already doing that. And then when you talk to the clin ops or the business folks, like, no, we don't have that. And that pattern's persisted when we're talking to prospective clients or even, current clients where, the folks on the business side will say, we absolutely don't have what you guys are bringing to bear. And then, we start to hit a bit of friction in the sales process when we start to talk to the analytics folks. Oh yeah, we do that. And they, in fact, don't do that or don't do it in a way that's understandable for the clinical operators.
I will still say we're not perfect. We still mess that up sometimes
Sure,
too, right?
sure.
Just
Yeah.
less often than what we would if we didn't have it.
Yeah, just generally up and to the right. I think that's the goal
Exactly.
here. So, Brad, you talked a little bit about the time component, making sure that the information was recent, timely, actionable, all the rest of it. There's another time dimension in all this, which is the tech is moving so fast. Internally to SIFWell, it's almost like we're swapping out LLMs on an every other week basis or a coding co-pilot on a weekly basis. How are you guys keeping up with the changes?
I will say, and this isn't again unique to longevity. I think at some point people will not keep up with the changes, right? They're
Mm.
going to have to pick and choose. I think for us, one of the things we're really trying to focus on is at least small hits. So, and what I mean by that is, there was a study that came out. I'm gonna butcher whoever it was, but it came out that almost like 82% of all AI pilots were failing. Right? When they did a root cause on why, it was like, well, by the time they get to market, they go through compliance, they get everything out and through. And it was healthcare specific. It was saying that like there was new tech. And so they had created this awesome product. And by the time it went through all the traditional IT, like normal things that you need to do to maintain your SOC 2 Type 2 and everything else, by the time it gets to the market and it goes into production, right?
Yeah.
It was outdated. And so one of the things we're trying to do to address that is we're trying to start small and just do small hits. Like we've got a portfolio of different, solutions, I'm sure as everyone has. Like there's a million ideas on what to do, right? But the idea is like, well, how do you implement it? And I think the best route to implementing is have a clear strategy behind the scenes. And that's one thing from a leadership perspective we have really, really great at longevity is like there's a strategy. And if it's not within the strategy, we're not doing it. Right. And so I think one, that's extremely helpful. So avoid scope creep. Two, right now, because of how fast it's moving, you can always have a foundational larger project on the side. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but do not put all of your eggs. If I was talking to somebody asking me for advice, I'd say like, don't put all of your eggs in a single big, massive AI pilot. Because if you
Mhm.
do that at the end of the day, like if that's all you're doing, you run the risk of it really flopping hard and then you don't have anything to show. I think both to an investor perspective as well as like to your constituents, you could be outdated. So like my biggest thing is like have a big project on the side that you want to do, but also have a bunch of tiny projects that are just more, quick hitters,
Yeah.
like building a RAG agent for job aids or doing this or doing that. Like there's super basic stuff that's tried and true. It's not going to change. We know what's there. We know what's capable and it's not on the breaking edge, but at the same time, it's quick. The other thing I would say is one big thing that we've done, and it has helped a lot as well with adoption, is there's two routes that I feel like people could take with AI in healthcare. Like one, you go down the route of building AI tools with AI facing solutions and it's all AI, right? And it's very AI
Mhm.
forward. And I think those are really cool and really shiny, and those get a lot of attention. The most boring AI thing that you could do, which is kind of a juxtaposition for me, but like the most boring AI thing you could do is build something that's not AI with AI, and then you're just fast and efficient, right? And
Mm.
I think that's the other thing that we've tried to do is instead of getting caught in certain loops, we're absolutely building AI products that will have AI solutions at the end of it, but the faster stuff that's just quick and easy and it's really repeatable is like using AI tools that can help you build something either through agentic, like, well, of course it's going to be agentic coding, but like there's multiple ways of doing it, whether it's an application or whether it's a just a script that you need to write, or like how you empower your day-to-day staff in their existing roles to make them more efficient has just been, that's been where we've really found our efficiencies, not so
Yeah.
much in the fancy AI pilots, but like in just embedding it into some analytical workflows so that we're able to work faster and better.
Brad, I want to pick up on the thread of adoption because for you, it's important for obviously for Siftwell as we're rolling thing out to client adoption is huge. I recently heard a quote which said, something about AI adoption happens at the speed of trust. And I like the quote. It sounds like you've got, a clinical operator or somebody that really knows the space to help bridge that. What are some of the other strategies that they're using to drive adoption inside of the kind of the virtue of trust or even outside of that? How do you think about adoption and strategies to drive that?
Couple thoughts there. I think the first one is there are a lot of AI companies, like tech companies, that are trying to break into the managed care space, and they're new, brand new, right? Then there's equally a lot of clinical companies that have a lot of success with clinical backgrounds
Yeah.
that are trying to build IT solutions. And it sounds very similar, right? But I think, oh man, is it like such a significant difference? Like when you partner, I know like your background primarily is obviously now with Sifwell, but like you've got that operations not a clinician, but you've got that background, and I think it's so important, so vitally important that when you're choosing your vendor portfolio of people to partner with as an organization, that you are being selective and making sure that the people you're looking at have previous clinical success and understanding outside of just being a tech company, right? And that doesn't mean that they're not effective. I think we've got a couple partners of ours that are more tech facing than they are clinical facing, and that's worked out. But it comes with some obstacles that you're going to navigate. And one of those is adoption, right? Like naturally, if you can talk to your clinical staff, especially if it's a tool that you're expecting your clinicians to use, and you're not doing it through a company that has reputation that they can trust, that is more clinical based versus a tech person coming in and offering a clinician they know how to do their job, I think the optics there are significant, and it's absolutely worth doing that. The other thing I would say on adoption is making sure that, well, it sounds basic, but like there has to be transparency. And
Mhm.
I think one of the fastest things that I've seen, and I've failed here before, and I think that anyone in analytics has probably failed here before, is not making sure that we keep like the folks who are going to be using the tool in the loop. And I know that's something SIFTWIL does really well, and
Yeah.
but there has to be a partnership mentality where you can't take a request and then try to operationalize it and then go and deliver it and be like, oh, here we go, right? They have to be involved every step of the way, and I think that as long as the leadership is involved, then it's there, right? I think if again, it comes into how something's rolled out and how something's built, and as long as there's clarity there, I think your success rate is going to be much higher.
Yeah, Brad, I remember. I appreciate you highlighting kind of that the notion of the history of SIF. Well, that was a really important conversation for us. Or when we started, are we a healthcare company or are we a tech company? And we overwhelmingly decided, we're a healthcare company that happens to use tech for healthcare purposes, and we really led with that. And as we build our organization, similar to how you're building yours, is we're constantly monitoring the chemistry, the experiment that we're doing between cutting edge technologists but maintaining kind of a deep healthcare DNA, so to speak. So Brad, I'm gonna switch gears a little away from the AI conversation. I would love for people to learn a little bit more about what an I-SNP is, longevity. It's a relatively new market segment or a growing market segment. You certainly are leading in that space. What are you excited about with regard to your future or just the future of the market?
So from a model perspective, one thing that's just I'm passionate about, and I'm gonna be honest, full disclosure, I've drinking the Kool-Aid, right? So like you guys are getting a completely
Yeah,
biased
no, I love
perspective.
it. Yeah.
But like skilled nursing, in all of my other experience in larger health plans, right? The population that's in a skilled nursing facility, they never get attention. And I don't mean in person. I mean like the health plan even is like maybe they'll have a care coordinator, maybe, but nine
Yeah.
times out of 10, all the focus is just, oh, well, like they're in a facility, right? So we're gonna focus on those in home. Or oh, we'll give them a phone call they didn't pick up. Right. And it's like, well, of course they didn't pick up. They've got dementia. Like you can't
Yeah.
expect them to pick up, right? So the cool thing with I-SNP is and this is from having 3 of my grandparents. I only have 1 living left, and she's now currently in a skilled nursing facility, right? So, like, there is an opportunity like, the model is specifically built around somebody in a nursing facility, and they are the most vulnerable population, right? They're lonely, sometimes they're forgotten, they need help, they're going through a degradation of their health, so that they're getting to a point where they're not functioning the way they used to, and so normal health plans aren't designed for that population. And
Yeah.
so the cool thing that iSNPs do is they allow us to, at least, from a longevity perspective, we hire local nurse practitioners that can drive to the facility. And every single week they drive to the facility, they go in door to door. And since they're a nurse practitioner, not an RM, they're able to treat bedside, they can prescribe, they can actually run an encounter, and then they can escalate to the PCP if they need. And we're actually able to treat people bedside and avoid hospitalizations that otherwise they would have, right? So if grandma has a UTI and nobody notices, she's gonna go into the hospital. It's a horrible experience. Sometimes if they have dementia, I think 65%, 70% of our population has dementia or some form of it, right? They get to the point where they don't know where they are, and there's studies that show that ends up reducing the quality of their life thereafter, and it can turn into a cyclical thing that ultimately ends in their death, right? And so if there's a way it's a model that allows iSNPs are a model that allow us to treat bedside to a vulnerable population that's often forgotten, and it's a good way of just treating people like people, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the super nerdy part is it's a completely underanalyzed group. And so when it gets into building models or looking at different things or forecasting or, doing different stuff, like it's just fascinating because it's stuff that you traditionally wouldn't see and that large health plans might have the population to be able to do it, but that's not where they're prioritizing their resources,
Mhm.
right? And so it's an honor to get to kind of to dive into that. And I think the other piece of it too that's fascinating is, we'll see people will if somebody has ESRD, your method to treating and trying to target a group with ESRD and making sure that they have a clean pathway to care is totally different if they're in a skilled nursing facility, right? Versus that and your capabilities are completely different. Like, sometimes having mobile dialysis units aren't realistic for people living at home, or if they are, it's not cost effective, right? And so then it becomes a luxury more than it is something that's, realistic. But in a skilled nursing facility, if you have a population that has a heavy ESRD population, you can do mobile dialysis, and then guess what? Grandma or grandpa doesn't have to leave the nursing facility, go on a stretcher, take an ambulance ride, sit in a chair, and wait 5 hours. I mean, the average ESRD thing for somebody with ESRD, like the average dialysis treatment for them in a skilled nursing facility with a stretcher and an ambulance and everything else, it's like a 5-hour, 6-hour ordeal. And we've found ways, and we're working on ways to make it so it can happen either bedside or it can happen in a dialysis den in the facility. And there's studies that have shown Google Health came out with one, last year, and they partnered with a university, I'm blanking on which one, but it improves there's proof that it gives them more time, the recovery is faster after dialysis treatment, and they have more time to do things like PT, OT, or anything else that can give them more independence. And so, it's just very cool. It's an awesome model. I think we've seen other things too with C-SNPs where you're seeing other really unique types of benefit structures come out for
Mhm.
different niche populations, and it's an exciting time, I think, for health plans to get to that point because look, let's be honest, health plans don't have a great rap, and so I think, like, being able to find really unique ways of creating really unique benefits and doing unique pilots that otherwise, certain populations wouldn't get to experience
Yeah.
is it not only is it interesting, it's rewarding.
Yeah, I think that flexibility is super important. And, I'm having these conversations with a lot of, former Medicaid directors and so on and so forth. And, that's one of recurring themes. I would say the other recurring theme that you're making me think about is, you can fill the Library of Congress with self-help books or business success books, but the one common denominator that I see with people that are very successful is the passion. And Brad, you've clearly got it. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think you got to love what you do because you got to do it a lot of hours in the day in order to be successful. So, um, Brad, tell me a little bit about what you're excited about, either within the I-SNP world or within the AI world. Like, what are you looking forward to getting your hands on or getting done?
Before I jump into AI, because I think that that's like the fun stuff. Like I think CMS is coming out with really cool models. Like we're getting to play with like the ACO Reach, and we're participating there, which is naturally turning into the lead model in 27. I think like looking at those models and understanding what's happening from an industry perspective is really fascinating to me. Totally outside of the analytics space, right? But I think it's exciting to see those gain traction, and it's exciting to kind of see how those could kind of ultimately end up in better healthcare outcomes for members. I think that's one just exciting thing to watch. But with AI, it's a fascinating kind of transition. I think the really interesting thing that we're starting to see that has me kind of excited is and I'm going to get technical here for a second, but like it's when we get into like the agentic capabilities where we're not just talking to a chatbot, but you've got like cursors getting controlled on screens that allow you to replicate horrible, like annoying processes that people just are like doing every single day. And it's like not an effective use of their time and it's not an effective use of enterprise resources. And I've been at, I think, every single health plan I've been at, I could count on more than one hand times where, like, we had eligibility teams logging in and downloading a file
Mm,
on a regular basis, or people going in and logging in and moving this file over to that file, or and it's not stuff that you could like, there's no APIs for it, right? There's no like, the integration to do that doesn't make any sense. So, the capability to kind of have agentic cursors that you can stand up a VDI and give it a task and have it go off and do something redundant that would save, 1, a lot of time, 2, and it's I'm not talking about replacing jobs, I'm talking about making, like, making a smarter use of the administrative costs we already have, right?
yeah,
That, and then lastly, I think, like, from a compliance lens, that's huge, right? There's a
yeah,
lot of and that feeds into the timeliness of data I was talking about earlier. Like, so often is data delayed or slow because there's a bunch of manual things that have to happen for it to get to where it needs to go,
yeah,
right? That you can't build an API or it doesn't work like this, or you gotta go into a portal for that, and so there's just really cool concepts and possibilities to be able to do there. Um, and then I would just say, I'm still enamored by it, but, like, the agentic coding and stuff, and, like, we use Cursor at Longevity, and there's other like, Windsurf's another good one, and but, like, having, with and I have to say this caveat, with compliance oversight, right? Like, it has to be compliant. Everything has to be
yeah,
compliant. So it's important that IT teams and compliance and everybody is, like, on board, and it's all there, but we've just been able to do stuff faster in the last 6 months than we ever could
yeah,
have done manually, and it just changes the game in terms of, like, why you do something, right? Like, PowerPoints. Nobody ever would have thought of building a PowerPoint with a Python script, but now it's like, I would never not build a PowerPoint with a Python script, you know what I mean? And so,
right.
like,
Yeah,
but it's goofy stuff like that, that it's
yeah,
just, if that's, like, the old stuff that, "Oh, that's dated," everyone's doing that, like, it's just cool and exciting to see where we're gonna go from there. And then I think some of the it's, the one thing that I would say is kinda interesting. So, I've been really fascinated with, as of late, like, the the GPTs, but like the custom GPTs. And there's conflicting research out there, right? Like one of them says like, well, if there's 2,000 journals loaded into this, or there's, I think another unsaid company is partnered with one of the big research organizations out there, and they have full access to any of their research journals, right? And they're building these custom GPTs for clinicians.
Yeah.
And so there's conflicting research out there that says basically that some of the more streamlined GPTs on the advanced side are actually exceeding the performance of some of these other customized GPTs. So that's one thing that's interesting. But the more interesting thing is there was a study done in I think it was out in Kenya, but they went to like 56 different practices and gave them access to. You're not in your head. I'm not sure if you know the one I'm talking about, but
No, I don't, but I'm gonna read it now.
okay,
You got
cool.
a lot of links to pull together, by the way.
Yeah, I'll shoot it to you. I'll shoot it to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
But there's this, and basically they did a study on giving clinicians a GPT, a clinical GPT, and they found that it was like 96% of the time it was accurate. But the fascinating thing, and this is what really has my mind going as of late, the fascinating thing though, Trey, is that the adoption of the good recommendations was low, and there was a disproportionate adoption of the 4% errors.
Fascinating.
And so it's like, then you take a pause, you go, wait a minute, like
Yeah.
it's not just AI, but it's like AI and human behavior of adopting AI.
Yeah.
And it's like the study basically shows that humans are more likely to take on bad advice and less likely to take on good advice. And so it makes you wonder, like, what's going on in the human psyche and brain to like make them go to that. So I know that's kind of deep, but like that is what's very fascinating, because as AI just continues to grow and more stuff comes out, like it's all about how we as humans will interact with it. And it's just really interesting when you start
That's
thinking about how
fascinating.
it works.
I would love to take a look at that and why there's asymmetry in the adoption of good versus bad advice. And I wonder if it has something to do with human intuition. Now, Brad, you built a GPT, so tell us about your experience with that.
Which one, Trey? Which one?
Yeah, the managed care one, the one that I still use.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
That was that was a while ago. That was like a year and a half ago now that we did it. No, it was one of those where I went to a really great, my first large health plan I was at out of private equity. I went to this like managers and up, like managed care 101 is what it was called. And it was the coolest like boot camp I think I've ever been to. It sounds incredibly boring saying it out loud, but I promise. Like
Yeah,
we went and it
yeah.
was like no. First off, the leadership was like no phones, no laptops, which is what a commitment, right? Because it was a room full of leaders, and for a day and a half they said no phones, no laptops. The other thing is it was basically how the entire machine from bid design all the way to paying a claim works. The entire process. And so it was all, when I talk about like how the machine works, right? Like that was how it was. So I've always wanted to recreate that. So about a year and a half ago, I was like, you know what I should really do? I should just build my own RAG agent and then basically just have all the context and markdown files, like build basically a custom skill around managed care. And so it took some interesting navigating from the technology lens. And I guess at the time I was building a skill. It wasn't called a skill at that time, right? It was just a bunch of markdown files that I pushed into it. But it was cool, right? Like it ultimately, you could ask it anything, like explain the bid process, and it would go through, or you could say, hey, this. So I used that with my team. Because I think, going back to what I mentioned at the beginning, like analytics teams don't always understand. You find somebody who's been an analyst, or developer, like sometimes they don't get exposed to that stuff, right? So it's our job as leaders to give it to them. So I gave that to my team, and I was like, hey, you guys should totally use this. And it was cool. It got I got some traction on LinkedIn and different stuff, but the experience was interesting. And I think, shoot, that was with like ChatGPT 3 something. Like I don't remember what it was. But like it was, it was a good experience, but I forgot about that.
Yeah. No, I have not. So before we wrap, I want to make sure that we either kind of put on the screen the link to that, or you say what it is, because I've actually used it since. So
Sure. Yeah, I'd
um,
be happy to do that.
And the funny thing about the Python script leading into the PowerPoint, I don't if you haven't seen this thing happen quite yet, it's pretty incredible how all that unfolds. Recently was with our CTO Eben, who you've met before,
Yep.
and I absolutely had a slop tart of a PowerPoint presentation. We recorded a conversation. He uploaded that terrible PowerPoint presentation plus the conversation. What I got back was something I would have gotten from probably a manager at Price Waterhouse, which was it's pretty wild. So again, if folks don't know what we're talking about, go on a one of the GPTs and find out. So all right, Brett, I got one last kind of work question, and then I'm gonna pivot to personal. I read a quote from you that said your AI strategy is going to be as good as your legal department or something similar to that. Do you remember that quote? And can you share more context? Because just a minute ago you were talking about compliance a little bit, and would love to broaden the aperture for what you meant by that.
Sure. So just in case my legal team is watching this.
No, it was from a previous job. Don't worry.
No, so I don't wanna take credit for that because I do think it's an insightful quote, but it wasn't my quote. But I had requoted a peer of mine, and it was through a conversation. They said, "Your AI strategy is only as good as your compliance and your IT's risk, appetite." Right?
Yeah.
So it's talking through a lot of this stuff is moving so fast that there isn't clear policy. And so I think, to me, it comes back to communication. It also comes back to understanding, like, how are you working with partners and how are you effectively communicating to your group and what it is that it does, how does it operate, what's your risk appetite, and then your AI strategy needs to feed off of your risk appetite. If you have an extremely conservative risk appetite, then you're going to have to lean back and focus on more tried and true stuff. And now granted, right, it's only oh no, it's a year and a half old. So it's like, super old, but like for AI, that is old, right? But that's where I was mentioning like RAG agents and other things. Don't ignore the non-shiny stuff just because it's old. You can
Yeah.
really create a solid AI strategy that's effective and has a lot of ROI and is received well off of year and a half old technology, right? So I think
Mm.
my biggest advice there is like if you have an AI strategy that doesn't match the appetite of your compliance team or your IT team, in terms of risk, like you're not going to succeed. So
Yeah.
and we as leaders, you can always push on your compliance team to try to like come and meet in the middle. I think that makes sense sometimes. At the same time, I mean, you gotta make sure you're doing it the right way. And the biggest thing that could ruin an AI rollout or AI adoption, is not following that process and then creating or having an incident that ultimately results in like shock, right? Where I'd call it like AI shock, where it just stops and then you don't have anything move forward for 3 months because you try to cut corners. So it's important for any professional listening, like coordinate with your IT team, make sure your legal team's aware, like make sure there's some clear governance strategies around what it is that you're doing. I think shoot NCQA is requiring a governance committee for AI in 2027 anyways. So if anybody NCQA, you're gonna need that. So, but yeah, I think that would be the biggest thing. But I think it was a quote that I heard from my peer, and it really made me pause and reflect a lot on my strategy. And frankly, I've pivoted ever so slightly since then, just because it has a lot of truth. If
Yeah.
you don't if you're not aligned to the rest of your executives, whether it's compliance, whether it's IT or anybody else, then there's some really cool stuff out there, but there has to be an appetite beyond the scope of the people implementing it. That even if it has a really awesome ROI, if the buy-in isn't there and the strategy isn't there, and the appetite's not there in terms of risk, in gray area, transparently, right?
Yep.
Then you're gonna go knocking on a door that won't open.
And I mean, I think for the folks that are at the more nimble plans that doesn't necessarily correlate with size, but the community health plans, smaller plans, more nimble plans. I think that what is becoming an opportunity is for these folks to leapfrog potentially the larger plans. If legal compliance is the limiting factor, really drill in there, make sure you're sharp, make sure you're dynamic in that area, and then that will enable kind of your AI strategy. And then to your point, just about there's a lot of tried and true technologies. Everyone refers to it as GoFi, good old fashioned AI. There's a lot of technologies out there that are really powerful. Brad, one last one for you. In the multiverse, what is the other Brad Riley doing? That's not VP of ramp.
I'm totally a park ranger. That is absolutely, absolutely what I'm doing. I've got the whole round brim hat, and I'm out in like Yosemite right now doing that. So I think there was yeah, yeah, I'm definitely a nature person. So I'd like to. That's what the other Brad is doing right now. So I've got the analytics AI Brad here, and multiverse Brad is out in nature. That's not doesn't sound too bad right now. Why is
Sounds perfect to me. I'd probably be out there with you. So, Brad Riley, I am super appreciative for your time, you sharing your expertise, your wisdom. If folks want to find you on LinkedIn, it's Brad Riley at Longevity. Any other plugs here, Brad?
No, I think I've appreciated the time. We've had a great conversation, and really always enjoy the conversation with the Sifwell. You guys have a great model, and look forward to seeing what you guys can do too.
Awesome. Good to talk to you, Brad. Thanks for your time, brother.
Likewise, thanks.